Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, September 22nd. And if you're watching this, that means you either missed class today and need to figure out what we did, or you're running back to try to make sense out of something that we talked about. Either way, remember that you can stop and pause and rewind the video as needed to make sure that you're getting the things out of it that you need to. A couple of fast reminders. That's kind of important. Don't forget that yesterday, we assigned us a piece of work called Closing the Frontier. Closing the Frontier kind of runs you through an overview of the entire chapter that we're going to talk about. I think it'd be a great idea to make sure you're kind of taking a look through that and working on your communication skills there. It'll give you a great overview, like I said, of all the major topics in the unit. That's due Thursday by midnight. The second thing I wanted to remind you guys really quick of is that I'm working on getting things in the gradebook, as are the other teachers. So make sure that you're checking Infinite Campus often. We're kind of getting toward the middle of this, quarter semester. I don't know what to call it. So make sure that you're keeping up with things in your classes because you don't want to get behind and get in a spot where you can't, get yourself caught up. Okay, so kind of today what we're going to do is we're going to run through some slides, and then obviously there's going to be some work time. So the time that you've allotted for American history today, use some of it to watch this, and then use some of that time to work on your Closing the Frontier. Please do remember, I am here to help if you're struggling on something, some old assignments, current Closing the Frontier, or something in another class. I'm here. You just want to chit chat, get a recommendation for a TV show, something like that. I am available to you guys via chat, email. You do have my phone number in the class rules way down in the classroom feed. So if you need that, please go ahead and use that. And I'm going to present my screen here, or go into presentation mode here in Google Slides, and go through the HAPs for today. Okay. So I just disappeared again. That's okay. All right. So the goals for today, or what I want you to get out of today's class, is a couple of quick reminders. I've been trying to do a really good job of putting feedback on your assignments. Capitalize this, make sure you have a comma here. You didn't answer this part of the question. And you can use that feedback in a couple of ways. The first way that you can do things is you can go back and you can make corrections to the assignment if you want to, and then resubmit it. Please do remember that if you want me to look at it again, you need to resubmit it, or I won't know to look at it. The other reason why I give you feedback is so that you can make improvements for future assignments. Okay, we want you to be able to look at those notes that we're leaving you on your assignments and be able to, make some adjustments to make your writing or your ability to, do research that much stronger. I'm not putting the feedback on there just to stay busy. Trust me, it's the opposite. I'm doing it for you guys. If I was doing feedback for myself, I would probably find another hobby. Okay, so please look at that feedback. I'm taking the time to do it for you. So please, give me a couple of minutes and read through it. The other thing is, and I said this already once today, please make sure you're checking those grades. It's going to be a really important thing for you to stay up on what you're doing and what you owe, and kind of where we're going next. So please do, stay on top of those things. So what we're going to do today is we are going to start a new unit. And that unit is going to be on Manifest Destiny and the Way West. Some schools call it the Wild West. Some schools call it the West. Some schools call it the Final Frontier. I've got a little bit of a different name for it. But we're going to cover the goals for that unit, 6 things that we would like you to get out of this unit this quarter. This 2-week stretch, and the things I want you to be able to do. And then we're actually going to talk about the West, like the myth of the West that were presented in TV and movies versus the reality of what's really going on. I put down that we're going to preview the idea of Manifest Destiny, but honestly, we didn't get to that today, so we're gonna put that off till tomorrow. And like I said, you can use some work time. So the title of this kind of chunk of things that we're going to do is Manifest Destiny and the Cost of Expansion. Now, it's my understanding that last year you guys talked a little bit about Manifest Destiny if you were in Marshall and Headmister Place. I've gotten a couple of good definitions so far today. Explain to me what Manifest Destiny was. We're not just going to look at that movement west. We're also going to look at the impact on the different groups of people that were involved, the people that moved west and what they were doing, and the people that were already in the West and how this mass migration impacted, their existence in the West. On the right over there, the picture that I chose is actually a very famous painting about Manifest Destiny. And if you look at the angel, the woman who is floating above the crowd of pioneers, who, by the way, the pioneers are all white. She's got a school book in one hand because she's bringing that Anglo-Saxon white education west. And she's also got telegraph line wrapped around her right arm and in her left hand. So she's, kind of bringing the American way of life west as the people move that way. So it's kind of an interesting painting. I only gave you about a third of it. You can see the train in the background, and way back in the back middle, you can kind of see some teepees underneath the wire there. So kind of an interesting painting that kind of depicts the situation in a very poetic and romantic way. Okay. So our goals for this unit. In this unit, there are basically going to be 6 big things that we're going to talk about, or 6 major ideas that I want you to be able to discuss or something on the, at the end of things. These could, be tweaked into some kind of short essay test, or, scary idea I came up with last hour. I would assign you a time where you would come on, and maybe I would ask you 1 or 2 of these where you'd have to answer them in person. That could get a little interesting. We might look into that. Not to scare anybody. I'll probably forget about it by tomorrow, and that's okay. So the 6 things I want you guys to be able to do is we need to be able to compare and contrast the reality and the myth of the Old West. I want you guys to be able to understand what the difference is between the Hollywood TV version of the West, where it was cowboys and Indians and there were gunfights in the road and all those different things, versus the reality of what was really going on. The idea of the Lone Ranger, or even I think maybe some of you guys have seen a movie called Rango. The ideas that are in those movies versus what was probably more realistic. We're going to talk about that idea of manifest destiny that spread west, and we're going to talk about where that came from and what that looked like. And we'll talk about the human cost of that, like I said on the last slide. We're going to evaluate the impact of the Transcontinental Railroad. Now, I want to dissect that word a little bit. Transcontinental means across a continent. And so during this chapter, there was a railroad built that went, there was already railroads in the eastern part of the country, but there was a railroad built that allowed people to go from New York to California on one trip. Prior to this, the fastest way to get from coast to coast was via horse or covered wagon. It was a trip that took about 6 to 9 months. It was very dangerous. If you ever played the Oregon Trail, you probably died of dysentery somewhere along things. Or if you ever heard of the Donner Party, the group of people that got caught in the mountains and ended up moving to cannibalism to have enough food, that wasn't always the safest way to go. Cannibalism and safe probably don't belong in the same sentence. So, if you were scrunching your nose, I understand. But when we built the Transcontinental Railroad, that reduced the trip time down to about 6 to 7 days, depending on how many times you had to change trains and things like that. We're going to learn to think critically about the impact of expansion on the peoples that already lived in the West, the native tribes that were out there and the Latino people who settled the Southwest, and how the movement or migration of people from the East to the West impacted their lives. We're going to talk a little bit about the economy of the West, like what did people do for a living, the ranching, the mining, and the farming that happened. Life wasn't just bank robberies and endless games of poker as the TV shows would lead us to believe. And we're also going to talk about the role that women played in the development of the West, the farming, the equality in voting, how prostitution became a business that helped fuel a lot of positive expansion in the western part of the country. So again, those are the 6 things we really want you to get out of this unit, and hopefully as we go, these things will kind of get kind of looped back through a couple of times so that they make sense. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the myths of the West, some of the things that you get from TV shows and the movies that some of you guys might have seen. As a kid growing up, obviously I'm pretty old compared to you guys, there were still a lot of TV shows on that depicted the Old West, and still a lot of movies. My dad was a fan of the actor in the middle of the screen, a guy named John Wayne, who played a lot of movie cowboys, generally was the hero who came in and saved the day. The guy in the upper left-hand corner is Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood started off in what were called spaghetti westerns, and they called them spaghetti westerns because they were Western movies that were made in Italy. And he was in the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, A Fistful of Dollars, and more famously maybe The Outlaw Josie Wales, were all Westerns where he was kind of this dark but heroic character who always saved the day. And then in the lower left, you've got the Lone Ranger and his sidekick Tonto. They originally started off as a radio show, moved into being a TV show, and then have, and I think the last 30 years, there's been a couple of Lone Ranger movies. Actually, in the last Lone Ranger movie, Johnny Depp played Tonto. So an actor that you guys probably know. So, what the things we think we know, I think maybe one of the times that I got this pointed out to me the most is I enjoy a TV show called Adam Ruins Everything. And in one of the episodes of Adam Ruins Everything, they do Adam Ruins the Wild West. And they talk about some of the myths of the West versus the reality of what it was probably like. And I already kind of knew all those things, but it kind of made me pay a little bit more attention to the romantic version of the West that we were presented, that there were these heroes and there were these bad guys, and it was this fight of good versus evil, and the cowboy was always there to save the day no matter what the problems, versus the reality of history. And one of the first myths that you see a lot in those old things is the idea of the great white cowboy. The good guy wears white, the bad guy wears black. But honestly, in a lot of cases, cowboys weren't white to begin with. They began as vaqueros, which is the Spanish word for cowboy, and many of the early vaqueros were Mexican, or they were African American, or they were natives. And so a lower percentage of cowboys were actually white. There weren't gunfights in the street at high noon every day over poker games gone wrong or land rights or the honor of this good woman. I mean, there were gunfights, but they weren't like, on the strike of 12, draw your gun and fire, and the fastest gun in the West wins. If life were like the movies, there wouldn't have been any people alive back then. The idea of a cowboy as a peacekeeper, cowboys weren't like heroes or policemen. They were farmhands. Most cowboys' jobs were to deliver cattle across the Great Plains to buyers who then wanted to ship them out so people could eat steak. Cowboys just didn't randomly roam the West looking for adventure. They were working men who earned an honest living. The other concept that cowboys fought against the savage Indians, and God, please take the tone of my voice to understand that I was joking there. In the movies, you have these same generic native people riding with headdresses and face paint and making this god-awful war cry, fighting these generic battles against the settlers that go across the land. In reality, that's not a very accurate depiction of not just cowboys, but also of the native peoples of the West. In the movies, you also get this idea that the heroic U.S. Army came to save the day. In reality, the Army, they were doing what they could according to government orders, but oftentimes the Army in the West were our second and third best groups of troops because our best people were fighting in the Civil War. A lot of times the Army used tactics that we would not agree with today in order to defeat the native tribes, and did things that when we talk about them, they're going to make you cringe a little bit. In the movies, the natives are kind of just, like I said, this generic stereotype. In reality, there were a lot of native nations in the West. There's 550 native tribal nations in the United States today. So back then there were even more, because a lot have had their tribal recognition stripped by the federal government, and even more, some of the tribes have combined with each other. But think about that. If we still have 550 tribes plus in the United States today, there were a lot more back then, and they were all very unique, had their own languages, had their own ways of doing things, hunting, farming, the way that they lived. I mean, not everybody lived in a teepee in the West. It's not the way that it worked. Women in those movies and things, they're generally kind of generic, one of two things. They're the prostitute who works upstairs at the saloon. If you think about it, here, let's go through the stereotype. If I'm in a saloon, that means I'll walk through the swinging doors. There's going to be a piano with somebody playing. There's going to be round tables with people drinking, smoking, and playing cards. And there's going to be a bar where we're going to order whiskey. If we walk up the stairs, that's where the prostitutes are. Okay. And there was a lot of prostitution in the West. That was actually probably one of the best paying jobs that a woman could have in the West. But women took that money and became like the pillars of communities and invested that money back in the community. A lot of women were farmers and worked just as hard as men to establish the land. And so we'll talk about the roles of women. One of the other things you see in those movies, everyone's always finding gold. And yes, there were gold strikes, 1849 in California, 1859 near Pikes Peak. There was the Klondike gold rush up in Canada and Alaska. And there was gold found in the Black Hills, but not everybody's finding gold everywhere. And actually that greed for gold caused a lot of the problems with the native tribes. And then the main thing I wanted to look at right here is this idea of the hero of the West. Those guys on the left, they get depicted as these heroic characters that are constantly saving the day and saving everyone. When in reality, like I said, cowboys generally were farmhands. There were good people. There were sheriffs who helped keep the law. There were also sheriffs who did unlawful things. There were robbers, and in the movies and in the books, some of those robbers are made out to be heroic. Billy the Kid, for instance, when he was 15, became an orphan. By 17, he was already wanted for robbery in several places and killing people. Billy the Kid, I mean, honestly, his hands were tiny, so he could slip out of handcuffs. And in some cases, the jail cell bars were so wide apart that he could walk out of jails. Most of the people that Billy the Kid shot, he shot in the back. And so the idea of playing some of those caricatures or those stereotypes off as heroes is incorrect. If we want to really point to maybe a possible hero of the West, we're going to talk about an engineer and inventor named Willis Carrier, who in 1902 invented the air conditioner. Because without the air conditioner, a lot of the West would be unlivable. Like, I mean, Arizona in the middle of the summer, it's like 120 degrees. No way in heck I want to live there without a little bit of cold AC blowing on me. Okay. And so those are some of the myths that just hit on a few, but we're also going to talk about kind of as we go throughout this chapter. We're going to loop back into this topic. That's really going to be it for today as far as the kind of things we went through in the notes. Now, if you've got more time on the docket, spend some of that working on that Closing the Frontier assignment. I am here to help if need be. So please do make sure and ask if you need me. Otherwise, I will I hope to see you soon in class, and I hope you're well.